Howdy, it's Kyle talking about Vermont. In this video, I'll be going over various aspects of the geography of the state. I'll be talking about the population and the cities. I'll be going over the physical geography to include the natural landscape and the climate. I'll be talking about economic indicators to include companies that are headquartered there, industries that drive the economy, and the taxes. And I'll also be going over some of the food and other aspects of Vermont that makes it very unique. So if you're interested in learning more about the Green Mountain State, this is the video for you. Vermont is one of the 6 New England states. It ranks 45th in terms of area, and with a population of about 625,000, it ranks 49th in population. To give you an idea of just how lightly populated the state is, there are approximately 120 counties in the country with more people than Vermont, and there are 77 metro areas in the country with more people than Vermont. It has one of the oldest resident populations in the country and is actually seeing a slight decline in population. It sits right along the Canadian border, and the state is approximately 160 miles long from the Canadian border down to the Massachusetts border. Because Vermont sits right along the border with the French-speaking portion of Canada, there are many French speakers in the state. You'll see bilingual signs, and some of the tourist sites will have things printed up in French as well. There are approximately 10,000 people in the state that speak French as their primary language, and you'll see many tourists coming down from Quebec to visit the state, or also to do some shopping because you go to the Costco there, there'll be plenty of people from Quebec doing their shopping. And to further illustrate Vermont's close ties to Quebec, the closest big city for most people in the state is Montreal, which is about a 2-hour drive away for most Vermonters. And compare that to Boston, which is about a 3-hour drive away for most people in the state. Vermont was actually an independent country from 1777 to 1791, and in 1791 is when it joined the U.S. as the 14th state, and it was the first state admitted to the Union after the original 13 colonies. The capital is Montpelier, with a population of only about 8,000 people, so it's the smallest state capital in the country. However, the Montpelier area has about 20,000 people, so it is a little bit larger than Pierre, South Dakota, but yeah, Montpelier is a pretty small state capital. And it has a very nice state capitol building, which is very fitting for a small state like Vermont. The largest city is Burlington, with a population of about 40,000 people, and there are about 100,000 people or so in the Burlington area. And this is a pretty funky town with some elements of counterculture going on. So I put it in the same category as similar cities like Asheville, North Carolina, Santa Cruz, California, or Key West, Florida. This towns that march to the beat of their own drum. They don't care what you think. But it's a pretty fun town to visit with a pedestrian main street and some pretty cool shops. And just like pretty much all of Vermont, it's kind of a cute little town with some old historic buildings and just some pretty neat looking scenery. And apparently it's a pretty popular spot for nudists to be out in public. It's one of those towns that doesn't have any billboards, and there's sign ordinances. You don't see big giant gaudy signs all over town. And I've always really liked towns that have no billboards and have sign ordinance, so if you've ever been to one of these, it just looks so much nicer, so much cleaner. Burlington is also home to the University of Vermont, so you combine the free spirit of Vermont with a major university, and well, you get a funky town like Burlington, and it really is one of the most unique cities in the country. The next largest population center in the state is the town of Rutland, and Rutland with the immediate towns next to it has about 20,000 people combined. And for Vermont, this is a big city. But just like Burlington and Montpelier, it's a really cool downtown, really nice, cute little main street with some nice old historic buildings. So there are approximately 100,000 people in the Burlington area and about 20,000 each in Montpelier and Rutland. So 140,000 people live in quote-unquote cities, but the rest of the approximately 500,000 people in the state live in towns smaller than 7,000 people. So a pretty large majority of people in Vermont are in rural areas. Next, I want to discuss some of the physical geography of the state. So the name Vermont, or Vermont, is French for Green Mountains, and it's the Green Mountain State. And one look at Vermont, and you can see it's aptly named. For such a small state, Vermont packs in a lot of beautiful scenery. Most of the state is either rolling hills or mountains, and it is very green, as the name implies. There are no national parks in the state, but there are several national forests, state forests, and other protected areas. Green Mountain National Forest is the largest one in the state, and there are a lot of cool hiking trails, a lot of great camping spots. It's a really beautiful spot to see. The highest point in the state is Mount Mansfield, with an elevation of 4,400 feet, so Vermont ranks 26th in the U.S. in terms of highest elevation.
And there's a lot of fresh water in the state as well, with a lot of lakes and rivers, a lot of great spots for paddling. Half of the state's western border with New York is Lake Champlain, which is a large north-south oriented lake. Most of the lake and the majority of the islands in the lake are in Vermont. And because you have mountains and a lot of snow, ski resorts are pretty popular during the winter. And the ski resorts in Vermont receive more annual snow than any other ski resorts in the contiguous U.S. And Vermont is also where the snowboard was invented. Summers are some of the most beautiful ones you're going to get in the entire country. Pleasant temperatures and lots of sunshine. The vast majority of the state doesn't have a single month of the year where the high temperature average is over 80 degrees. So for most parts of the state, even in the summertime, the temperature is going to be in the 70s. But even though summers are very beautiful there, they also are very short. Vermont is probably the most well-known part of the country for its fall foliage. People will drive from all around the northeastern portion of the country to see those beautiful fall colors. But because you are so far north and also inland, winters get really cold and they're also really long. So it doesn't just have really cold temperatures, there's also a ton of snow. So the northeastern portion of the U.S. gets the most snow of the country, and it's also really cold because it isn't along the coast. And not that the coastal areas of Maine or Massachusetts have warm winters, but they are a little bit warmer than Vermont's. So Vermont might very well be the most beautiful state in the country per area when you consider that it's such a small state and almost all of it is very pretty.
Next, I want to go over some of the economic indicators of the state. And for a state that's so small, everything is, of course, going to be at a much smaller scale. So total GDP is small, total dollars is all going to be pretty small, but the economy of the state is still very interesting.
Vermont's GDP is $35 billion a year, which makes it last in the country. Well, someone's got to be. Its GDP per capita is 33rd in the U.S. at $44,000 per year, and its household income is 22nd in the country at $62,000 per year. So if a state ranks a lot higher in its household income than its GDP per capita, that's a pretty good indication that the state doesn't have any major companies headquartered there. So the wages might be pretty good, but there aren't any big companies really pushing the GDP of the state higher. The largest companies headquartered in the state include Brewers Enterprises, which is a bagel and bakery chain in the northeastern U.S., the Mack Group, which does plastics molding and sheet metal fabrication, Bowl, New England, which is the corporate headquarters for the spare time bowling centers found throughout the eastern U.S., Burton Snowboards, and Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream are some of the other major companies in the state. The largest private employer in the state is Global Foundries, which does semiconductors and integrated circuits, although the company is not headquartered in Vermont. So none of these are major companies that would be big-time economic players in much larger states, but Vermont only has 625,000 people, so for a state that small, that's a good list of companies headquartered there. But you can't help but go, oh, how cute, in knowing that a bowling center operator is one of the biggest companies in the state. Tourism is also a major player in the state's economy, so as mentioned before, a lot of folks come down from Quebec to do their shopping. It's a popular area for ski resorts, and again, that fall foliage draws people from all across the eastern U.S. Mining also plays an important role in Vermont's economy. It's pretty big for marble and granite quarrying, including the largest granite quarry in the U.S., and it's also the #1 producer for slate in the country. So right next door is New Hampshire, the granite state, so it isn't much of a surprise that Vermont has a lot of granite as well. Vermont is also a pretty important state for dairy. The state produces 2/3 of the milk consumed in New England, and it's also pretty well known for its cheese, with Cabot Cheese and Vermont Butter and Cheese Company both being pretty big. And it's probably no surprise to learn that 20% of Vermont's dairy is certified organic. In terms of ag, Vermont is most known for its maple syrup, and it is the #1 producer of maple syrup in the U.S. Approximately 50% of all the U.S. output of maple syrup comes from Vermont. And now to talk about those good old taxes. Vermont's income taxes are on a progressive scale, and they range from pretty reasonable for folks making under $40,000 to pretty high to people making over $100,000. Although income taxes are pretty high, the sales taxes are pretty low, with it being 6.2%, which ranks at 36th in the country. But the property taxes are also pretty high. They're the 9th highest in the country. And Vermont is one of only 14 states that taxes Social Security benefits. So with fairly high income tax, high property tax, and taxing of Social Security benefits, Vermont is overall a pretty high tax state. So overall, Vermont's economy is pretty well diversified. Again, it's such a small state it doesn't need a whole bunch of major companies to be headquartered there to be economically solvent. There are 120 counties with more people than Vermont, so many of those counties would love to have as many companies headquartered there as are in the state of Vermont. But with all that being said, Vermont's overall a pretty minor player in terms of the overall national economy.
So that's how the money flows in the state. So now I want to discuss some of the signature foods of Vermont. And with a unique state like this, you can expect some of the signature dishes to be pretty unique, and they are. With Vermont being the #1 supplier of maple syrup in the US and it having a lot of snow, well, one of Vermont's staple foods is called sugar on snow. This is literally just pouring maple syrup on snow and then eating it. And then you follow it up with a pickle because, that makes sense. Vermont. Another signature food of the state are fiddleheads, and these are young ferns that you forage for out in the woods and then cook up like greens. If you had to guess a state that had a signature food that involves foraging out in the woods, well, Vermont. Vermont is also one of the top producers of turnips in the US, and there's a big turnip festival there each year. And oftentimes these turnips are turned into a dessert, like turnip donuts. Now, doesn't that sound appetizing? So there you have it. That's the stuff that I wanted to discuss about Vermont, and it's a very unique state. So it's almost entirely rural, almost all small towns, and the things that go on there are pretty unique to that state. And I can appreciate that. I always like unique places, and I like Vermont. I hope you found the information in this video useful. If you did, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and subscribe to this channel if you're interested in learning more about U.S. geography, U.S. travel, road tripping across the U.S., just interesting things about geography of the U.S. from a very unique and nerdy perspective. But yeah, thanks for watching. Geography King, signing out.